He built a career on saying the unspeakable, driving the unthinkable, and somehow surviving scandal after scandal that would have ended anyone else. But in the space of 18 months, Jeremy Clarkson faced something that no supercar, no shouting match, and no tabloid headline could outdrive. Twice, doctors told him things that most people never want to hear. Twice, he had to sit with the possibility that his story might not have a next chapter. And through all of it, cameras kept rolling, because the show he had built his final act around was never really about tractors and mud. It was about a man running out of road and choosing to film it anyway. This is what really happened to Jeremy Clarkson at 66. And by the end of it, you may find yourself far more moved than you expected to be by a story about a farmer who used to shout about cars. Long before the fame, before the Cotswolds farm, before three men in a shed became the most recognizable trio on television, Jeremy Clarkson was a boy from South Yorkshire with more opinions than the room could hold. He was born in April 1960 near Doncaster, the son of a traveling salesman and a mother who ran a small toy business out of the house, a business that, almost by accident, took off when she began making stuffed Paddington Bear toys. That modest success meant young Jeremy could be sent to a well-regarded boarding school in Derbyshire, where he sat in classrooms alongside a future Formula One engineering legend and the man who would later help build his entire television career. It reads now like the universe quietly assembling its pieces years in advance, though at the time it looked like nothing more than a restless teenager getting into trouble. And trouble he found. He was eventually asked to leave school, by his own account, for a mix of smoking, drinking, and generally making a nuisance of himself, the kind of description that, looking at the man he became, feels less like a warning sign and more like a job description he simply hadn't been offered yet. After school there was no dramatic leap into stardom. There was a sales job, driving around the country selling the same toy bears his mother had built her business on, learning the roads of Britain in a way that would later become oddly central to his life's work. Then came journalism, the unglamorous kind, at a regional newspaper in Rotherham, followed by stops at other local papers where nobody was paying attention to bylines. But something in his writing voice refused to stay quiet. It was blunt where other reporters were careful, funny where other reporters were flat, and opinionated in a way that regional motoring pages had never quite seen before. By the mid-1980s he had started his own small press agency, testing cars and writing about them for whoever would publish him, and slowly the trade began to notice. Television scouts noticed too. His break came from an old motoring program that had, frankly, lost its spark. He auditioned by spending a full 20 minutes tearing apart a small French car with a level of theatrical disdain that most people reserve for genuine betrayal, and the producers reportedly knew almost immediately that they had found something different. He joined that program in the late 1980s, tasked with dragging a tired format into a new era, and he did exactly that. But it was the version relaunched in the early 2000s, built alongside two co-hosts and a producer who had known him since school, that turned into something almost impossible to categorize. It stopped being a car show in any conventional sense. It became a global phenomenon, broadcast in more than 100 countries, watched by hundreds of millions of people who mostly could not have told you the difference between a diesel and a petrol engine and did not care. What kept them watching was never the machinery. It was three ordinary men needling each other across deserts and mountains and disaster after self-inflicted disaster, and one of them in particular saying exactly what he thought with no apparent filter at all. Alongside the show he was writing a weekly newspaper column that reached readers who had zero interest in motoring, because the car in his writing was always just an excuse to talk about something bigger. He had built himself into one of the most recognizable broadcasters in the world, and with that kind of visibility came exactly the kind of exposure that eventually catches up with anyone. It caught up with him in 2015, and it did not happen quietly. While filming on location in North Yorkshire, after a long day of shooting, Clarkson was offered cold food because the hotel kitchen had already closed, having been promised a hot meal after driving for hours. What followed was an argument with a producer that escalated into a physical altercation lasting under a minute, one that left the other man needing hospital treatment for a cut and swollen lip. In an odd twist that says something about the man's instincts even in a crisis, it was Clarkson himself who reported the incident to his own employer. Within weeks the investigation concluded, and the broadcaster announced his contract would not be renewed. The public response was extraordinary. Over 1 million people signed a petition demanding his reinstatement, one of the fastest-growing petitions the platform had ever recorded, and his 2 co-hosts walked away from the show in solidarity rather than continue without him. The program tried to carry on with new faces, but for years afterward the numbers told a story of an audience that had followed 3 specific people rather than a brand or a badge. Clarkson later settled a legal claim brought by the producer, paid a significant sum, apologized publicly, and by every reasonable measure should have spent some time out of the spotlight rehabilitating his image quietly. He did not do that. Within months he and his 2 co-hosts, along with the producer who had shaped their careers from the start, had signed a deal with a major streaming service to build a brand new show from scratch. It launched at the end of 2016 and ran for nearly a decade, traveling to some of the most remote and visually stunning locations on the planet, proving beyond doubt that audiences had been loyal to the people, not the network they used to work for. But the project that would end up defining the later years of his career had nothing to do with engines at all. In 2019 he bought a farm in the Cotswolds, mostly on a whim, and began attempting to run it himself with almost no relevant experience. The documentary series that emerged from that experiment premiered in 2021 and became something nobody involved had quite anticipated. It showed a completely different side of the man audiences thought they knew. Here was someone genuinely out of his depth, humbled again and again by weather, bureaucracy, and the simple unforgiving reality of agricultural life, discovering that a lifetime of confidence behind the wheel of the world's fastest cars meant absolutely nothing when a crop failed or a council rejected a planning application. Working alongside his farm manager, a young local man with a dry wit and zero patience for nonsense, the show became one of the most beloved pieces of factual television anywhere in the world, pulling in an entirely new audience who had never watched a single episode of his motoring days. It also had a way of showing the real version of him, stripped of performance, in a way nothing else in his career ever had. And what came next would test that honesty more than anything the farm had thrown at him so far. In October 2024, word broke that Clarkson had undergone emergency heart surgery after feeling unwell for several days while away from home. Doctors found that one of his coronary arteries was completely blocked. He was rushed to a hospital in Oxford, where surgeons carried out a 2-hour procedure to fit 2 stents and restore blood flow, avoiding the need for full bypass surgery. He later described himself as having come within days of a heart attack when the blockage was found, and it was not an exaggeration for effect. It was simply what the doctors told him. He wrote about the experience in his newspaper column with the same directness that had defined his writing for decades, describing what it felt like to lie still while a thin instrument threaded its way through his chest, honest enough about the fear of it to make the moment land, but never tipping into self-pity. The following season of his farming show addressed the health scare directly in its opening episodes, with him explaining plainly to his farm manager that one of the 3 arteries feeding his heart had been entirely blocked. What gave the moment its weight was the mundane detail around it. The farm had simply carried on without him while he recovered, because land does not pause for anyone's cardiac event, and the show never tried to dress his return up as some kind of triumphant hero's journey. He just went back to work because the work still needed doing. That alone would have been more than enough drama for one television season. It was not, unfortunately, where the story ended. In May 2025, a routine medical check led to further tests, and a biopsy confirmed what nobody wanted to hear. He had prostate cancer, and doctors described it as aggressive. He would later stress again and again that it had been caught extremely early, and that early detection was the single factor separating a manageable situation from one that could have spread without warning. He chose to share the diagnosis on camera, sitting down with his farm manager and his land agent at the farm to tell them directly that the cancer was serious but caught in time, and that he intended to finish the harvest before beginning any treatment. The scene carried an emotional charge that the ordinary farmland setting only deepened. These were not journalists or executives hearing a carefully worded statement. These were people who had spent years standing beside him through floods, ruined crops, planning battles, and every other disaster the farm had produced, watching him say something that, for the first time, had nothing to do with weather or bureaucracy at all. The final episode of that season, released in the middle of June 2026, ended with one of the most quietly devastating moments British television has produced in years. Clarkson appeared from a hospital bed following surgery in which a portion of his prostate had been removed at the site of the tumor. He told viewers plainly that parts of the treatment had not gone the way anyone had hoped, and that he would be staying in hospital longer than planned. Then he said the line that stopped a global audience cold. If the treatment worked, he told them he would see them for the next season. If it did not, he would not. He wished everyone well, and the screen cut to black. There was nothing theatrical about how it landed. This was not a scripted cliffhanger built for shock value. It was a 66-year-old man in a hospital gown, genuinely uncertain what came next, choosing to say that uncertainty out loud to an audience who had spent years watching him act as though nothing in the world could touch him. The reaction that followed was immediate and completely sincere, the kind of response that cannot be manufactured by a publicity team, because it reflected something he had probably never set out to build across 4 decades of provocative columns and even more provocative television. People genuinely cared what happened to him next. The relief when it arrived came quickly. In an interview with his longtime newspaper, Clarkson confirmed he is now officially in remission, calling himself, without a trace of irony, the luckiest man in the world. A blood test carried out in the spring of 2026 showed no remaining evidence of cancer. He shared the news publicly almost immediately, understanding that the people who had watched that hospital bed scene deserved to know how the story actually ended. He posted a video online, filmed walking around the farm outdoors, and opened it in a way that only he could have written for himself, telling his followers that the more observant among them would have noticed he was not, in fact, dead. He added that he was not merely alive, but doing very well, joking that his eyebrows in particular had never looked better. Then, almost without pausing for the laugh, he moved straight into the message he clearly understood was the entire point of going public in the first place. He urged men to get tested, explaining that modern screening for prostate cancer is not the invasive process many still assume it to be. It is, in most cases, a simple blood test available from any doctor, one that costs almost nothing in time or discomfort and can be the difference between catching something early and not catching it at all. His argument was blunt and impossible to misunderstand. He got tested. It was found early. He is still here. That, in his own words, is the entire case for doing it. In that same newspaper interview, he reflected with unusual clarity on the previous 2 years, admitting that between the heart emergency in late 2024 and the cancer diagnosis in 2025, he had faced the real possibility of death twice within roughly a single year. He spoke about watching friends lose their own battles with cancer over the years, about the particular helplessness of knowing an illness is spreading and cannot be stopped, and about how much difference a single routine test made in his own outcome. He was equally candid and unflattering to himself about the complication that landed him back in hospital during that finale. He admitted he had been taking blood-thinning medication for his heart throughout cancer treatment, and made the decision on his own, without consulting a doctor, to resume it before he was medically cleared. The result was a severe medical emergency in the middle of the night that he described as pain beyond anything on a normal scale. He did not try to soften it or shift blame elsewhere. He said plainly that it was entirely his own mistake, and then he simply moved forward. As of the middle of 2026, he is back at the farm, filming the next season of the show, already confirmed for release the following summer. He turned up at a major agricultural trade event hosted on his own land, which drew a record crowd of more than 25,000 visitors, walking through the crowd, stopping to talk with farmers, laughing, delivering a speech with cameras rolling around him exactly as they always have. The same man who, weeks earlier, had appeared in a hospital gown genuinely unsure whether there would be another season, was now standing in a muddy field surrounded by the people that show made him care about. He has kept hosting a long-running television quiz program and continues writing his weekly newspaper columns, maintaining a workload that would exhaust broadcasters half his age. There is something almost too fitting about the fact that one of the most deliberately combative voices in British broadcasting has become one of the most effective advocates for prostate cancer awareness among men, reaching an audience that formal health campaigns often struggle to move. His credibility with people who typically tune out official medical messaging was built over decades, And his willingness to say, without sentiment or spin, that a single blood test saved his life, carries more weight than most public health campaigns could ever hope to generate on their own. Prostate cancer remains one of the most common cancers affecting men, and in its earliest and most treatable stages it frequently produces no symptoms at all. That silence is exactly why routine conversations between men and their doctors matter so much, and exactly why a figure with his reach putting that message in front of people who might otherwise never think twice about it matters just as much. If even one person watched that hospital bed scene, booked a simple blood test because of it, and caught something early enough to treat, then showing the hardest year of his life on camera will have mattered more than any award his career ever collected. The story of Jeremy Clarkson at 66 is not a story about a man slowing down or fading from view. It is the story of someone who faced real mortality twice within a single year, came through both, and answered it not with quiet retreat but with the same blunt, uncomfortable honesty that built his entire career. He showed the hospital bed. He said the hard thing out loud. He told his audience exactly what was happening to him. And then he put his boots back on, walked back out onto his farm, and told everyone watching to go get a simple blood test. In its own loud, unmistakably Clarkson way, that might be the most genuinely remarkable thing he has ever done on camera.